Welcome back to our channel. Today we drift into one of the most mysterious and chilling chapters of history, the dark and secret world of Hitler's occult obsession and the myths that shaped the Third Reich. If you love uncovering hidden histories and exploring the untold stories behind the rise of Nazi Germany, you're in the right place. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more fascinating videos. And hit the notification bell so you never miss an exploration into history's most intriguing secrets. Hitler. The mere mention of his name evokes images of unparalleled horror, of a world plunged into darkness, of cities reduced to rubble and millions of lives extinguished in the flames of a war driven by ideology. He is remembered as a masterful orator, a manipulator of masses, a strategist of war, and the architect of the most destructive regime the world had ever seen. Yet behind the public persona of the Führer, the disciplined military leader, and the political tactician, there existed a layer of obsession that is less discussed, less tangible, but no less significant in understanding the man and the machinery of the Third Reich. This was an obsession with the occult, with the mystical, with the hidden forces of the universe that Hitler and his inner circle believed could be harnessed to achieve their vision of a new world order. To the casual observer, this fascination may seem bizarre, almost fantastical, the indulgence of men in the shadows of history, but in reality it played a subtle yet deeply influential role in shaping the ideological, spiritual, and even practical strategies of the Nazi regime. Understanding this dimension of Hitler's mind provides insight into the interplay of belief, manipulation, and power, and it illuminates how myth and superstition became tools in one of the darkest chapters of human history. From the very beginning, Hitler was steeped in a cultural milieu that romanticized myth and history. Born in Braunau am Inn in 1889, he grew up in a period when Europe, and Germany in particular, was awash with nationalism, pseudo-science, and a fascination with Aryan identity and ancient Germanic traditions. These ideas were not unique to Hitler, they were pervasive in the intellectual and cultural climate of the time, but he absorbed them with a singular intensity. Stories of heroic Germanic warriors, of ancient tribes conquering lands and shaping civilizations, of mystical forces guiding the destinies of great men, were not merely the fabric of folklore for him, they became a lens through which he interpreted the world and its possibilities. The occult in this context was not just superstition, it was a framework, a means to connect contemporary ambitions with a glorified, almost sacred past. It promised validation for racial theories, ideological convictions, and ultimately for the ambitions that would culminate in his seizure of power. Hitler's fascination with the occult extended to symbols, rituals, and secret societies. The swastika, the most notorious emblem of the Nazi Party, is perhaps the most direct manifestation of this preoccupation. While today it is irrevocably linked to hatred and terror, the symbol itself has a history that stretches back thousands of years, appearing in cultures across Asia, Europe, and the Americas. For Hitler and the Nazis, the swastika was imbued with deep mystical meaning. It was a sign of cosmic order, a talisman of strength, and a visual representation of the so-called purity of the Aryan race. Unlike a simple flag or logo, the swastika was treated as a conduit of power, a way to connect the Third Reich with forces both historical and supernatural. It was in essence a bridge between myth and reality, between ideology and spiritual authority, and Hitler recognized its potential to inspire devotion, fear, and unquestioning loyalty among his followers. But Hitler's occult interests were not limited to symbols. He was drawn to secret societies and esoteric groups, the most famous of which was the Thule Society. Founded in Munich in 1918, the Thule Society was a group of intellectuals, aristocrats, and mystics who believed in Aryan supremacy and the spiritual power of ancient Germanic civilizations. They combined nationalist ideology with esoteric teachings, rituals, and even references to Atlantis, imagining that the Aryan race descended from a lost, technologically and spiritually advanced civilization. Hitler's early association with the Thule Society helped shape his understanding of racial mysticism and the use of myth as political propaganda. While there is debate among historians about the depth of his personal involvement, it is clear that the Society's ideas resonated with him. They provided a blueprint for blending ideology with mysticism, for presenting political ambition as a sacred mission guided by ancient forces. The occult in Hitler's worldview also manifested in his fascination with prophecy and destiny. He was known to consult astrologers, soothsayers, and mystics, and he reportedly believed that certain signs and symbols could indicate his path to power or the fate of nations. This interest may appear irrational, yet it reflects a consistent pattern in Hitler's thinking: the desire to link his actions to a grand cosmic narrative. In his mind, the rise of the Third Reich was not merely a political event, but a historical inevitability, sanctioned by unseen forces and aligned with the destiny of the Aryan race. This belief in destiny, amplified by mystical interpretation, allowed him to cast his ambitions in a larger-than-life frame, presenting himself not just as a leader, but as an instrument of history itself. One of the most fascinating aspects of Hitler's occult obsession is how it intertwined with the practicalities of the Nazi regime. He and his lieutenants were obsessed with relics, sacred artifacts, and objects believed to possess mystical power. Expeditions were sent to far-flung corners of the globe, from Tibet to the Middle East and across Europe, to uncover these treasures. The Holy Grail, the Spear of Destiny, and other legendary artifacts were pursued not merely for their historical or cultural value, but because they were believed to confer power, legitimacy, and spiritual advantage. Heinrich Himmler, head of the SS and one of the most notorious figures of the Nazi regime, took these pursuits to extremes. He envisioned the SS as a mystical brotherhood, elite warriors who were not only politically loyal but spiritually chosen to lead the Aryan race. Wewelsburg Castle was transformed into a ceremonial center, complete with rituals, initiations, and a symbolic alignment with cosmic principles. The blending of politics, mythology, and ritual created a powerful mystique around the Third Reich, one that reinforced loyalty and intimidated both enemies and allies. It is crucial to understand that Hitler's obsession with the occult was not merely a personal eccentricity or a series of harmless superstitions. It played a strategic role in consolidating power and shaping the ideology of the Nazi state. Myths, symbols, and esoteric beliefs became tools of propaganda, instruments for mobilizing mass support, and mechanisms for instilling a sense of inevitability and righteousness in the cause of the Third Reich. The mystical framework provided an aura of legitimacy to policies that were otherwise indefensible, allowing actions that led to oppression, terror, and genocide to be perceived as part of a grand historical mission. In this way, the occult functioned as both a psychological weapon and a political strategy, reinforcing the regime's ideological narrative while appealing to the primal fears and aspirations of the populace. The fascination with the occult also reflects a broader human tendency: the desire to find meaning in chaos, to believe in forces beyond the visible, and to anchor ambition in the sacred or the eternal. For Hitler, this desire was amplified by his personal psychology, his ambitions, and the turbulent historical moment in which he lived. The collapse of the German Empire, the humiliation of the Treaty of Versailles, and the social and economic upheavals of post-World War I Germany created fertile ground for someone willing to combine ideology, charisma, and mystical narrative into a compelling vision. By framing his mission as not just political but cosmic, Hitler could present himself as the executor of a destiny larger than himself, a man guided by unseen forces toward a predestined outcome. At the same time, Hitler's occult obsession must be viewed critically, without romanticizing or trivializing it. While tales of mystical expeditions, secret societies, and ancient relics can read like adventure stories, they were intertwined with a regime responsible for unimaginable suffering. The allure of myth and superstition became dangerous when combined with power, ambition, and an ideology rooted in hatred. Symbols and artifacts that might otherwise be mere curiosities were weaponized, and mystical beliefs were used to justify policies that resulted in war, persecution, and genocide. The occult, in the hands of Hitler and his inner circle, was a tool of manipulation, a means to control minds, hearts, and actions, demonstrating that even the most esoteric of interests can have deadly consequences when fused with political power. Hitler's fascination with the mystical also had a performative dimension. His speeches, public appearances, and even the architecture of Nazi Germany were infused with symbolic meaning, ritualistic grandeur, and mythic references. The Nuremberg rallies, with their carefully choreographed processions, lighting, and symbolism, were designed to evoke awe and transcendence, creating an almost religious fervor among participants. This blending of spectacle, symbol, and ideology reflects a deep understanding of the psychological impact of myth. By casting the Third Reich in the language of destiny and cosmic significance, Hitler and his associates transformed political loyalty into a quasi-religious devotion, illustrating the power of the mystical to inspire, intimidate, and mobilize. The study of Hitler's occult obsession also sheds light on the broader appeal of the supernatural in times of crisis. Throughout history, societies facing uncertainty, fear, and upheaval often turned to myths, rituals, and esoteric beliefs for guidance and reassurance. Hitler's manipulation of these tendencies highlights the ways in which myth can be weaponized, how symbols can be infused with ideological power, and how belief in hidden forces can be exploited to achieve political ends. It is a cautionary tale, demonstrating that fascination with the mystical is not inherently dangerous. But when combined with charismatic leadership, rigid ideology, and unchecked ambition, it can contribute to catastrophic outcomes. Ultimately, Hitler's obsession with the occult reveals a complex interplay of psychology, ideology, and history. It was shaped by cultural currents, personal beliefs, and political ambition, and it manifested in symbols, rituals, and myths that both inspired and controlled. While the Third Reich's fascination with mysticism may seem like a footnote in history, it provides crucial insight into the mind of one of the most infamous figures of the 20th century. It illustrates the ways in which belief, myth, and superstition can intersect with power and ideology, creating a force capable of shaping history in profound and tragic ways. By exploring this hidden dimension of Hitler's life, we gain not only a deeper understanding of the man himself, but also a sobering reminder of the dangers inherent in the manipulation of belief, the weaponization of myth, and the seductive allure of the unknown. In the end, Hitler's occult obsession was both personal and political, irrational and methodical, fantastical and terrifyingly practical. It offers a glimpse into a world where myth and history intertwined, where symbols became tools of power, and where the boundaries between the mystical and the real were blurred by ambition and ideology. Understanding this aspect of Hitler's psyche is essential to understanding the Third Reich itself, for it was within this intersection of mysticism and politics that the machinery of one of history's most infamous regimes was forged. It reminds us that the human desire for meaning, when manipulated and exploited, can lead to consequences far beyond the imagination, and that even in the darkest chapters of history, the unseen forces that guide belief can shape the visible world in ways both profound and horrifying. The swastika, a symbol that, for millions around the world, evokes fear, hatred, and the darkest chapters of human history. Yet its story is far older than the Third Reich, far richer than the ideology it would come to represent under Hitler's regime. Long before it became the emblem of Nazi terror, the swastika had been a symbol across cultures, continents, and centuries, appearing in the art, religion, and architecture of societies from India to Europe, from ancient Greece to Native American tribes. In Sanskrit, the word swastika translates to well-being or good fortune, and for millennia it carried positive connotations of life, prosperity, and cosmic harmony. But in the hands of Adolf Hitler and the architects of the Third Reich, it was transformed into something far more potent, far more dangerous. It became a talisman, a signal of racial purity, a psychological weapon, and a central element in the occult framework that permeated Nazi ideology. Hitler understood symbols like few political leaders in history. He knew that an image could communicate what words could not, that a single emblem could inspire loyalty, fear, devotion, and obedience. The swastika, tilted at a 45-degree angle within a stark red, white, and black flag, was designed for maximum visual impact. It was simple, instantly recognizable, and emotionally charged. But for Hitler, the swastika was more than mere propaganda. It was a bridge between ideology and mysticism. He saw in it a cosmic resonance, a connection to the supposed Aryan ancestors, and a way to link contemporary political ambition to a mythic past. In his mind, the symbol was not simply a logo, it was a conduit for destiny, an icon that could channel collective energy and bind a population to a single vision. This belief in the inherent power of symbols was not unique to Hitler, but he wielded it with a rare intensity and precision, integrating it into every facet of his public persona, party propaganda, and the rituals of the Nazi state. The swastika's ancient origins lent it an air of timeless authority which Hitler and his inner circle exploited. Archaeological and anthropological studies in the late 19th and early 20th centuries had begun to trace the presence of the swastika across Europe, particularly among Germanic and Nordic peoples. The Nazis latched onto these findings, interpreting them through the lens of racial mysticism. The swastika became a visual affirmation of Aryan supremacy, a link to an imagined ancestral lineage that predated recorded history. In Nazi mythology, the Aryans were not merely a race, they were a spiritually and culturally advanced civilization, a chosen people whose destiny was to reclaim dominance over the world. The swastika was positioned at the center of this narrative, a symbol of cosmic order, racial purity, and historical inevitability. It was a way of asserting that the Third Reich was not merely a political movement but a continuation of a sacred, ancient mission. Hitler's fascination with the swastika was both personal and performative. Accounts from contemporaries describe how he would lecture on the symbol's meaning, tracing its presence through ancient European artifacts, pagan sites, and medieval iconography. He seemed captivated by the idea that certain images could carry energy, influence behavior, and shape the consciousness of those who viewed them. This preoccupation was mirrored in the meticulous design of Nazi paraphernalia. Flags, uniforms, banners, coins, and medals all incorporated the swastika with exacting precision. It was never an afterthought, it was the visual heartbeat of the party, omnipresent in rallies, publications, and public spaces. Its repeated exposure created a psychological imprint, conditioning loyalty, fear, and awe in the minds of the German populace. To Hitler, the swastika was not just a symbol of ideology, it was a psychological instrument, a means to mold perception and a way to sanctify political power with the aura of myth. The swastika also played a central role in the rituals and ceremonies of the Nazi state. Mass rallies, particularly those held in Nuremberg, were orchestrated with almost religious precision. Thousands of swastika flags hung from every vantage point, creating a visual sea of red, white, and black that engulfed participants and observers alike. Marching formations, synchronized movements, and choreographed speeches all revolved around the symbol, turning it into the focal point of collective devotion. In these spectacles, the swastika functioned almost like a religious icon. It demanded attention, commanded reverence, and served as a visible manifestation of the party's mystical narrative. Hitler and his propagandists understood that symbols, when combined with spectacle and ritual, could transcend ordinary political messaging and evoke a profound, almost spiritual response. The swastika, in this context, became a tangible representation of the Führer's vision, an emblem of destiny, and a tool of psychological manipulation. Beyond its visual power, the swastika was deeply intertwined with the Nazis' racial and mystical theories. Hitler and other ideologues believed that the Aryan race possessed a unique spiritual and genetic superiority, and the swastika was the symbol through which this superiority could be communicated and celebrated. It was a reminder of supposed ancestral glory, a call to unity, and a marker of identity. The symbol was not simply displayed on flags and uniforms, it was incorporated into architecture, military insignia, and even currency, embedding it into the everyday life of Germany. By saturating the environment with the swastika, the Nazis ensured that their ideology was omnipresent, reinforcing the narrative that the Aryan destiny was inevitable and divinely sanctioned. The swastika was a visual shorthand for a complex web of beliefs, a constant reminder of the power, unity, and supposed purity of the race that Hitler sought to exalt above all others. Hitler's deployment of the swastika also illustrates his broader understanding of the psychological power of symbols in politics. He recognized that people do not merely respond to arguments and facts, they respond to imagery, ritual, and emotion. The swastika functioned as a magnet for collective sentiment, attracting loyalty, amplifying fear of the outsider, and creating a sense of belonging among followers. Its design was simple enough to be instantly recognizable, yet charged with layers of meaning that could be interpreted through the lenses of history, mysticism, and ideology. This combination of simplicity, ubiquity, and symbolic resonance made the swastika a uniquely effective tool in the Nazis' arsenal of propaganda. It was an image that could be reproduced endlessly, displayed prominently, and imbued with power, serving as a constant reminder of the regime's authority and the cosmic significance it claimed to wield. The swastika's influence extended beyond the visual realm into the metaphysical beliefs of Hitler and the Nazi elite. They believed that symbols could harness unseen energies, influence human behavior, and even alter the course of history. In Nazi thought, the swastika was more than a mark, it was a conduit for spiritual and cosmic forces. Hitler's personal interest in mysticism and destiny reinforced this perspective. He was reportedly drawn to astrology, numerology, and the study of ancient texts, always seeking patterns that could validate his vision and guide his actions. In this worldview, the swastika was not merely a tool of propaganda, it was a talisman, a bridge between the material and spiritual realms, and a symbol that could focus the collective will of the Aryan race toward conquest and domination. It is also important to understand the broader cultural context in which the swastika was adopted. Early 20th century Europe saw a resurgence of interest in pagan traditions, folklore, and esoteric knowledge. Archaeologists and anthropologists were uncovering evidence of ancient civilizations, and nationalist movements were eager to claim these discoveries as proof of ancestral greatness. The swastika, as an ancient European symbol, fit perfectly into this narrative. It provided a visual link to a glorified past, a mythic foundation for racial ideology, and a sense of continuity with history. Hitler and his propagandists exploited these currents skillfully, presenting the swastika as both historically authentic and divinely sanctioned. In doing so, they created a symbol that was simultaneously familiar, exotic, and imbued with the aura of sacred power. The adoption of the swastika also highlights the intersection of superstition and political strategy in the Third Reich. While modern observers may dismiss the belief in mystical power as irrational, for Hitler and his inner circle it was deeply pragmatic. Symbols like the swastika could unify, inspire, and intimidate in ways that conventional political messaging could not. By presenting the swastika as a symbol of destiny, purity, and cosmic order, Hitler elevated the Nazi movement from mere political ambition to a quasi-religious mission. Followers were not just citizens, they were participants in a historic, sacred struggle, and the swastika was the emblem that defined their loyalty, identity, and purpose. The psychological impact of the swastika cannot be overstated. In the streets of German cities, in schools, offices, and factories, the swastika was omnipresent. Its repeated exposure created familiarity, reinforced ideology, and normalized the presence of the Nazi Party in every aspect of life. Children grew up learning the symbol and its associated narratives. Adults encountered it daily in public and private spaces. The swastika became a visual mantra, a constant reinforcement of loyalty and belief. By saturating the environment with this emblem, Hitler and his propagandists ensured that the ideology of the Third Reich was not merely communicated, it was absorbed, internalized, and normalized. The power of the swastika also lay in its adaptability. It could be used in grand displays at rallies, subtle placements in architecture, or as insignia on uniforms, medals, and documents. Its visual simplicity allowed it to be scaled, rotated, and incorporated into nearly any design while maintaining immediate recognizability. This flexibility amplified its psychological impact, embedding it in the collective consciousness and reinforcing the omnipresence of Nazi ideology. In every context, from the intimate to the monumental, the swastika served as a reminder of the regime's reach, its authority, and its connection to a mystical destiny. Even today, the swastika retains its power, though in a vastly different context. Its historical transformation under Hitler has rendered it almost universally associated with hatred, terror, and genocide. Yet understanding its adoption, symbolism, and psychological impact in the context of the Third Reich provides insight into how symbols can be weaponized, how imagery can shape thought and behavior, and how belief in the mystical can be harnessed for political ends. The story of the swastika is a cautionary tale, a reminder that the human mind is deeply responsive to visual and symbolic stimuli, and that the meanings we attach to symbols can be redirected toward both creation and destruction. In conclusion, the swastika was far more than a flag, far more than a logo, far more than a symbol of ideology. In the hands of Hitler and the architects of the Third Reich, it became a potent instrument of power, a bridge between the material and mystical, a visual affirmation of destiny, and a psychological weapon that shaped the thoughts, emotions, and behaviors of millions. Its power lay not only in its historical resonance but in its strategic deployment, its integration into ritual, spectacle, and everyday life, and its capacity to inspire devotion, fear, and a sense of cosmic purpose. The story of the swastika under Hitler is a story of how symbols can transcend their origins, how myth can be weaponized, and how belief in the unseen can influence the course of human history in ways both profound and terrifying. The Third Reich was not merely a political regime, it was a regime that sought to rewrite history, redefine destiny, and root itself in myth as much as in ideology. Among the most striking manifestations of this obsession with myth was the Nazi fascination with ancient civilizations, legendary relics, and sacred artifacts. Hitler and his inner circle believed that the destiny of the Aryan race was intertwined with the mystical power of the past, that the greatness of Germany could be justified and amplified through the discovery and possession of objects imbued with spiritual and historical significance. This obsession was not limited to symbols or flags. It extended into a vast network of expeditions, rituals, and pseudo-archaeological pursuits designed to connect the present with a glorified, imagined past. Understanding this aspect of the Third Reich illuminates not only Hitler's personal psyche, but also the ways in which ideology, myth, and superstition were woven into the very machinery of the Nazi state. The Nazis' fascination with ancient myths was deeply rooted in the concept of Aryan supremacy, which held that the so-called Aryan race was descended from a highly advanced, spiritually and culturally superior civilization. This belief was influenced by a mix of pseudo-science, nationalist historiography, and occult speculation that was popular in late 19th and early 20th century Europe. Archaeologists, anthropologists, and historians were uncovering evidence of prehistoric cultures across Europe, often interpreting their findings through a nationalist lens that sought to trace modern populations back to heroic ancestors. Hitler and his ideological allies seized upon these ideas, constructing a mythic narrative in which the Aryans were not merely a race, but a chosen people whose destiny was to rule and purify the world. Ancient myths became more than stories; they were evidence, justification, and inspiration for the policies and ambitions of the Third Reich. Central to this mythic framework was the idea of lost civilizations, particularly Atlantis and other legendary cultures believed to have once dominated the earth. Hitler and the Nazis imagined that these civilizations were the original home of the Aryans, a superior people whose wisdom, power, and purity had been scattered or lost over millennia. The search for remnants of these societies became both an intellectual pursuit and a spiritual quest. Expeditions were launched to remote corners of the world in the hope of uncovering evidence of these lost cultures, a desire to retrieve what was seen as a sacred inheritance and to reclaim the power that had been lost. These quests were not idle fantasies; they were funded, organized, and undertaken with the full support of the Nazi state, reflecting the seriousness with which myth and history were interwoven into the political and spiritual objectives of the regime. One of the most notable figures in this pursuit was Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS, who took the obsession with relics and myths to extraordinary lengths. Himmler envisioned the SS not merely as an elite military organization but as a mystical brotherhood, a group of men spiritually and racially chosen to carry forward the mission of the Aryan race. Wewelsburg Castle was transformed into a ceremonial center for the SS, replete with ritual chambers, symbolic architecture, and designs meant to reflect the cosmic and spiritual order that Himmler believed the Aryans were destined to restore. In this context, ancient relics were not simply artifacts; they were imbued with sacred significance, thought to possess mystical power that could be harnessed to strengthen the spiritual and political authority of the Reich. Among the most famous of these relics was the Holy Grail, the legendary cup said to have been used by Christ at the Last Supper and to hold miraculous powers. For Hitler and the Nazis, the Grail represented the ultimate fusion of spiritual and temporal authority, a symbol that could legitimize their claims to power and connect them with the sacred past. Expeditions were sent to locate it, to study its supposed properties, and to bring it into the hands of the Reich. Similarly, the Spear of Destiny, the lance said to have pierced the side of Christ during the crucifixion, became a focus of obsessive interest. According to legend, whoever possessed the spear held dominion over the world. For Hitler, who believed in the power of symbols, relics, and destiny, acquiring such objects was not mere superstition; it was a way of aligning the ambitions of the Third Reich with forces he perceived as transcendent, eternal, and absolute. The fascination with relics was not limited to Christian artifacts. The Nazis were deeply interested in pagan symbols, ancient Germanic rituals, and archaeological sites that could be interpreted as proof of Aryan superiority. Sites across Europe were excavated, myths were reinterpreted, and artifacts were catalogued, displayed, and incorporated into Nazi ideology. The narrative they constructed was comprehensive, a history in which the Aryans had once ruled supreme, possessed knowledge and power beyond ordinary comprehension, and were now poised to reclaim their rightful place in the world. Myth and history became inseparable in the minds of the Nazi elite, and relics served as tangible evidence of the truths they believed they were uncovering. This obsession with ancient myths and relics extended beyond the European continent. Expeditions were sent to Tibet, the Middle East, and other remote regions in search of evidence that could support Nazi racial theories and mystical beliefs. Tibet in particular held a special allure due to its reputation as a repository of ancient wisdom and spiritual power. Anthropologists, pseudo-archaeologists, and SS operatives traveled there in the hope of uncovering secrets that would validate the myths of Aryan origin and superiority. They collected manuscripts, observed local rituals, and attempted to trace lineages that could be linked to the Aryans. These expeditions were framed as both scientific inquiry and spiritual quest, reflecting the Nazi ambition to merge knowledge, power, and mysticism into a single coherent vision. The pursuit of relics was also deeply tied to the idea of destiny and fate. Hitler and his inner circle believed that the Aryan race was not merely powerful in material sense, but was historically and spiritually chosen to dominate the world. Relics, symbols, and myths were interpreted as evidence of this destiny, reinforcing the notion that their political and military ambitions were sanctioned by history and cosmic order. In this worldview, the quest for ancient artifacts was not an indulgence, it was a necessary step in the fulfillment of a grand historical and spiritual mission. Each discovery, each recovered artifact, was seen as a confirmation of the correctness of their path and the inevitability of Aryan ascendancy. The use of myth and relics also served a practical political purpose. By linking contemporary ambitions to ancient symbols and sacred objects, the Nazis created a sense of inevitability and legitimacy. The populace could be persuaded that the Third Reich was not merely a political regime, but a continuation of a historical and spiritual lineage. The narrative of lost civilizations, mystical artifacts, and ancestral destiny created a powerful psychological framework that encouraged devotion, loyalty, and compliance. People were not merely citizens or soldiers, they were participants in a grand, mythic struggle, connected to a past of extraordinary achievement and to a future that promised greatness. The myths were instruments of social and political cohesion, as well as tools of manipulation and control. Himmler's Wewelsburg Castle exemplified the extent to which myth, ritual, and artifact could be integrated into the structure of power. The castle's architecture, ceremonial rooms, and symbolic designs were intended to reflect cosmic and historical order, reinforcing the mystical authority of the SS. Initiations, rituals, and secret ceremonies were conducted in the presence of symbolic artifacts, imbuing them with a sense of sacred purpose. These practices served multiple functions. They reinforced loyalty, elevated the status of the SS above ordinary military units, and created an aura of inevitability and destiny around the regime. Relics, whether recovered from ancient sites or interpreted from myths, were central to this ceremonial framework, serving as tangible links between ideology, history, and perceived cosmic order. The Nazi obsession with relics and myths also reveals much about Hitler's own psychology. He was a man who sought meaning, order, and justification in the world, and he believed that history, symbols, and artifacts could provide that. His personal interest in astrology, numerology, and mystical texts reflected a desire to perceive patterns and evidence of destiny in the world around him. The pursuit of relics was an external manifestation of this desire. By finding and possessing objects imbued with historical or spiritual significance, Hitler could assert control over a world that he otherwise perceived as chaotic, uncertain, and hostile. The artifacts were more than curious, they were instruments of power, validation, and control. The expeditions and quests for relics were often elaborate and far-reaching. Teams of archaeologists, historians, and SS officers were dispatched with meticulous instructions, combining scientific methods with esoteric inquiry. They sought not only tangible objects but also knowledge, manuscripts, and evidence that could support the narrative of Aryan supremacy and mystical authority. Reports, journals, and photographs from these missions reveal a mix of meticulous planning, ideological fervor, and spiritual expectation. Each journey was framed as both a mission of discovery and a fulfillment of destiny, blurring the line between scholarship, superstition, and propaganda. The Nazis were creating a mythic narrative in real time, using artifacts, expeditions, and interpretation to construct a history that justified and amplified their ambitions. It is also worth noting that this obsession was not confined to the upper echelons of the Nazi hierarchy. Propaganda disseminated these myths to the broader population, presenting relics, ancient sites, and historical narratives as evidence of the Aryans' greatness and inevitability. School curricula, publications, exhibitions, and speeches all reinforced the connection between myth, history, and contemporary policy. Citizens were encouraged to see themselves as inheritors of a glorious past, participants in a historic mission, and witnesses to a destiny that had been foretold. The pursuit of relics was thus not merely an elite endeavor, it was part of a broader cultural and ideological campaign to embed myth, legend, and history into the consciousness of the nation. Yet for all the fascination, the quest for relics also had darker implications. The belief that possession of certain artifacts could confer power, legitimacy, or spiritual authority reinforced the regime's sense of entitlement and invincibility. It justified expansion, conquest, and violence in the pursuit of objects deemed essential to destiny. Entire regions were excavated, cultural treasures were seized, and historical sites were manipulated or destroyed in the service of myth. The line between scholarship, superstition, and exploitation was blurred, and the pursuit of relics became entwined with the machinery of oppression and terror. In this sense, the obsession with ancient myths was not merely symbolic, it had real, tangible consequences for people, cultures, and historical heritage across Europe and beyond. The Nazi pursuit of relics also illustrates a broader phenomenon: the human desire to connect with the past, to locate meaning and power in history, and to find tangible links between myth and reality. For Hitler and his followers, this desire was amplified by ideology, ambition, and the mechanisms of the state. The myths they embraced were carefully selected, interpreted, and disseminated to serve political, psychological, and spiritual objectives. The relics they sought were more than objects, they were symbols of authority, instruments of legitimacy, and anchors for a narrative that justified domination and conquest. In this context, the search for ancient artifacts becomes a lens through which to understand the complex interplay of belief, ambition, and power in the Third Reich. Ultimately, the Nazis' obsession with ancient myths and relics reveals the ways in which ideology, superstition, and ambition can be intertwined to extraordinary effect. The search for the Holy Grail, the Spear of Destiny, lost Aryan civilizations, and sacred artifacts was not merely eccentric or fantastical, it was integral to the ideological, spiritual, and political machinery of the regime. Myths were weaponized, history was reconstructed, and artifacts were elevated into symbols of cosmic significance. The Third Reich's engagement with the past was both a reflection of its worldview and a tool for shaping the present, illustrating how belief in the mystical can be harnessed to achieve tangible, and often devastating, consequences. By exploring this obsession, we gain insight not only into Hitler and his inner circle, but also into the broader dynamics of power, symbolism, and human belief. The Nazi fascination with ancient myths and relics demonstrates that the past is never simply a record of what was. It is a resource that can be interpreted, manipulated, and used to justify ambitions in the present. In the hands of the Third Reich, myth and relic became instruments of destiny, propaganda, and control, illustrating the profound influence of belief, symbolism, and narrative on the course of history. The legacy of this obsession remains a subject of fascination and study. Archaeologists, historians, and scholars continue to investigate the expeditions, artifacts, and myths pursued by the Nazis, seeking to separate fact from legend and to understand the ideological and psychological forces that drove these quests. The pursuit of relics and myths serves as a reminder of the power of belief, the allure of the unknown, and the ways in which symbols, artifacts, and stories can be mobilized to shape thought, action, and destiny. It is a story of ambition, obsession, and the dangerous interplay between myth and power, one that continues to captivate and warn generations more than 70 years after the fall of the Third Reich. In the end, the Third Reich's quest for relics was more than a search for historical objects, it was a search for identity, legitimacy, and destiny. It reflected the belief that the past held keys to the future, that sacred artifacts could confer power, and that myths could be harnessed to shape both perception and reality. Hitler and his inner circle were not content with mere political domination, they sought to embed themselves in the narrative of history, to align their ambitions with the cosmos, and to legitimize their actions through the authority of the past. The pursuit of relics, therefore, was both symbolic and practical, a manifestation of the regime's ideological framework, and a testament to the profound influence of myth, belief, and obsession on the course of history. Heinrich Himmler, one of the most enigmatic and chilling figures of the Third Reich, was far more than a military commander or bureaucratic administrator. He was a man obsessed with mysticism, ritual, and the occult, and he envisioned the SS, the Schutzstaffel, not merely as an elite paramilitary organization, but as the spiritual and racial vanguard of a new Aryan civilization. While Adolf Hitler provided the political and ideological vision for the Reich, Himmler sought to imbue it with a mystical and almost religious dimension, creating structures, ceremonies, and practices that fused mythology, superstition, and an ideology of racial supremacy into an apparatus of loyalty, fear, and indoctrination. Adolf Hitler's interest in the occult was far more than a casual curiosity or superficial amusement, it was a profound and guiding influence on the way he perceived the world, understood history, and envisioned the destiny of Germany and the Aryan race. While many accounts of the Third Reich focus on his political ideology, military strategy, and authoritarian control, a deeper understanding of Hitler requires attention to his personal preoccupation with mystical concepts, symbols, and supposed supernatural forces. This fascination was neither abstract nor idle. It shaped decisions, inspired propaganda, guided the design of symbols, and influenced how Hitler interacted with both his inner circle and the wider German population. In many ways, the occult was not merely a hobby for Hitler, it was an organizing principle, a framework through which he interpreted reality, and a source of authority that reinforced his personal myth. From his early years in Vienna and Linz, Hitler displayed an extraordinary fascination with history, myth, and art. He was captivated by the grandeur of past civilizations, the mysteries of ancient societies, and the stories of heroic deeds and legendary leaders. While he formally pursued no academic career, he devoured books on world history, Germanic traditions, and the supposed glories of ancient Aryan cultures. In these texts, Hitler found more than entertainment. He found a narrative that validated his own sense of destiny and provided a framework for understanding the modern world. Ancient myths, he believed, were not merely stories, they were records of power, of spiritual and racial superiority, and of the natural order of the world, which he considered to be racially and historically hierarchical. Hitler's obsession with mysticism and the occult intensified as he rose to political prominence. He was deeply influenced by ideas circulating in Europe at the turn of the 20th century, including the widespread interest in spiritualism, secret societies, and esoteric knowledge. Occultist theories, particularly those connected to Aryan origins, Nordic mythology, and mystical energy, resonated with his worldview. He saw in them evidence that certain people were chosen by history and by cosmic law to shape civilization, and he applied this belief to himself and to the mission of the Nazi Party. Unlike casual enthusiasts of mysticism, Hitler integrated these ideas systematically into his thinking about leadership, power, and destiny. They were not tangential, they were central to the vision he had for Germany and for the world. One of the clearest examples of Hitler's personal fascination with the mystical is his obsession with the concept of destiny. He believed that the history of nations, and especially of the Aryan race, was guided by higher forces, and that he had been personally chosen to fulfill a preordained role. This sense of cosmic purpose was reinforced by his study of symbols, myths, and religious narratives. Hitler often interpreted contemporary events as signs or confirmations of his mission, reading meaning into coincidences, military victories, and even the timing of political developments. In his mind, the destiny of Germany and the Aryan people was not contingent or accidental, it was inevitable, sanctioned by history, and, in some sense, divinely ordained. This belief in destiny provided him with immense psychological confidence, a sense of infallibility, and the conviction that his actions were justified, regardless of their moral or human cost. Hitler's fascination with symbols is inseparable from this sense of destiny. The swastika, the eagle, and other visual emblems were not merely tools of propaganda, they were, in Hitler's mind, conduits of power. He believed that certain shapes, colors, and arrangements had intrinsic spiritual and psychological significance. By integrating these symbols into the architecture of the Nazi state, the uniforms of the party, and the rituals of rallies, Hitler sought to harness their power, to communicate his vision, and to unify the German people under a shared, almost sacred identity. He was meticulous in this regard, personally overseeing the design, display, and use of symbols to ensure that they conveyed precisely the message he intended. For Hitler, symbols were not superficial, they were instruments of fate and psychological control, capable of shaping belief and action. Beyond symbols, Hitler was captivated by the idea of relics and sacred objects. He shared the belief of many in the Nazi leadership that certain artifacts, like the Spear of Destiny or other legendary items, possessed inherent power. Acquiring, displaying, or associating with these objects was seen as a way to channel mystical energy, legitimize authority, and align oneself with history's grand design. This is one reason why expeditions were undertaken across Europe and Asia to locate relics and ancient manuscripts that could support the Aryan mythos. Hitler did not personally excavate sites, but he closely monitored these missions, evaluating their findings through a lens that combined ideology, superstition, and personal ambition. For him, the possession or endorsement of relics was a form of validation, a tangible confirmation that his vision was rooted in the forces of history and fate itself. Hitler's personal environment also reflected his mystical inclinations. He filled his residences, offices, and military headquarters with artifacts, paintings, and objects that resonated with ancient traditions and myths. These items were not mere decoration, they were carefully chosen to reinforce his worldview, provide inspiration, and create a sense of historical and spiritual continuity. Reports from contemporaries describe Hitler's intense interest in medieval swords, religious relics, and classical art, all of which he interpreted as evidence of the enduring power and superiority of the Aryan spirit. His private spaces functioned as a curated environment of myth and destiny, shaping not only his own sense of identity but also the impression he conveyed to visitors and advisors. Astrology and numerology were also central to Hitler's mystical preoccupations. He reportedly consulted astrologers and paid attention to dates, coincidences, and celestial events, interpreting them as confirmations of his mission. This was not idle superstition in his mind, it was part of a systematic approach to understanding the patterns of history and destiny. Hitler believed that certain times, events, and individuals were aligned with forces beyond the ordinary, and he acted accordingly. This attention to mystical patterns extended to military planning, political maneuvering, and personal decision-making, reinforcing his sense that he was guided by higher powers and that the trajectory of the Third Reich was preordained. Hitler's personal fascination with the occult also influenced his interactions with key figures in the Nazi Party. He was known to encourage individuals like Heinrich Himmler to develop mystical frameworks, rituals, and ceremonial structures for the SS, recognizing the power of these beliefs to inspire loyalty and devotion. He cultivated relationships with advisors who shared his interest in mysticism, secret societies, or ancient myths, integrating their expertise into the ideological and symbolic machinery of the Reich. Even in military and administrative matters, Hitler often interpreted reports, intelligence, and advice through the lens of destiny and mysticism, seeking patterns that confirmed his beliefs and reinforced his sense of purpose. His engagement with the occult was deeply intertwined with his leadership style, decision-making, and personal charisma. One of the most striking aspects of Hitler's fascination was his belief in the transformative and legitimizing power of myth. He understood that myths were not merely stories, they were instruments through which people understood themselves, their history, and their place in the world. By aligning the Nazi Party with ancient legends, heroic narratives, and mystical symbols, Hitler sought to elevate his movement above the mundane realm of politics into the sphere of destiny, myth, and sacred purpose. He presented himself as the inheritor of ancient authority, the executor of history's will, and the leader of a people chosen by fate. This blending of myth and political power created a psychological environment in which followers were not merely citizens or soldiers, they were participants in a sacred mission, connected to the past and invested in a vision of the future that was both inevitable and transcendent. The occult also provided a framework for Hitler's understanding of enemies and allies. He viewed the world through a lens of mystical and racial destiny, interpreting political, social, and military events as expressions of cosmic or historical law. Groups or individuals who opposed him were not simply rivals, they were seen as threats to the natural and divine order, embodiments of chaos or corruption that had to be purged. Conversely, those who aligned with his vision were framed as agents of destiny, participants in a sacred struggle that transcended ordinary human concerns. This framework justified extreme measures, from propaganda campaigns to acts of violence, by framing them as necessary for the fulfillment of historical and mystical law. The fusion of occult belief with political and military strategy created a mindset in which ideology, superstition, and action were inseparable. Hitler's personal fascination with the mystical also influenced his self-perception. He frequently cast himself as a historic, almost messianic figure, whose mission extended beyond politics into the realm of destiny and divine order. In private conversations, speeches, and writings, he described his role in terms that transcended ordinary leadership, framing himself as a chosen agent of history whose actions were sanctioned by cosmic and historical forces. This self-conception was reinforced by symbols, relics, and rituals, which functioned as tangible confirmations of his authority and mission. The psychological effect of this belief was profound, giving Hitler a sense of infallibility, inevitability, and moral justification that guided his decisions and reinforced his capacity for ruthlessness. The personal preoccupation with mysticism also shaped Hitler's propaganda and public persona. He carefully curated the imagery, speeches, and rituals that presented him as more than a political leader, as a figure aligned with history, destiny, and cosmic authority. Mass rallies, parades, and public events were orchestrated to evoke the awe of ancient traditions and the power of symbols, connecting the contemporary German people to a mythic past and reinforcing the narrative of inevitability and superiority. Hitler understood that the masses respond not only to logic or argument but to spectacle, symbol, and ritual. By integrating occult ideas into public performance, he was able to elevate his leadership into a near-religious experience, reinforcing loyalty and inspiring devotion. Hitler's fascination with the mystical also extended to architecture and design. He believed that the spaces in which people lived, worked, and gathered could be charged with symbolic and spiritual power. Monumental structures, urban planning, and ceremonial spaces were all considered opportunities to reinforce ideology and mysticism. Buildings, squares, and military facilities were designed with reference to ancient forms, symmetry, and symbolic resonance, creating an environment in which the ideology of the Third Reich was omnipresent and visually reinforced. In this sense, Hitler's personal interests shaped not only his private thinking but the physical and cultural landscape of Nazi Germany, embedding mysticism into the very fabric of the state. Even in his private life, Hitler's routines and habits reflected a concern with mystical and symbolic significance. He was reportedly attentive to dates, numbers, and ceremonial customs, interpreting patterns as signs of approval, destiny, or opportunity. His diet, personal rituals, and the arrangement of his spaces were sometimes guided by principles he believed were aligned with energy, health, and cosmic harmony. While these details may seem minor, they illustrate the extent to which mysticism was integrated into every aspect of his personal and public life. For Hitler, there was no distinction between the mystical and the practical. Both were intertwined and mutually reinforcing, shaping his worldview, decision-making, and leadership style. Hitler's personal fascination with the occult also had implications for the broader ambitions of the Third Reich. The mystical lens through which he viewed history and destiny influenced the regime's ideological campaigns, expansionist policies, and obsession with racial purity. The notion of a preordained Aryan destiny justified conquest, subjugation, and the systematic elimination of groups deemed inferior or threatening to cosmic and historical order. Myth, relics, and symbolism were mobilized not merely to inspire awe or loyalty, but to legitimize policies of control, domination, and genocide. In this sense, Hitler's personal preoccupations were not isolated eccentricities, they were instrumental in shaping the moral and operational framework of the Nazi state. Ultimately, Hitler's personal fascination with the mystical provides crucial insight into the unique character of the Third Reich. Unlike purely secular authoritarian regimes, the Nazi state was infused with a vision of history, destiny, and cosmic order that justified extraordinary ambition and extreme cruelty. Hitler's obsession with symbols, relics, myths, and mystical patterns was not peripheral, it was central to his identity, leadership style, and vision for Germany. It shaped the policies, propaganda, rituals, and structures of the Reich, creating a regime in which ideology, belief, and action were inseparable. Understanding this fascination allows us to see the Third Reich not merely as a political or military entity, but as a profoundly ideological and psychological system in which the personal obsessions of a single leader could shape the destiny of millions and leave a legacy of terror that resonates to this day. By examining Hitler's preoccupation with mysticism, we also gain a broader understanding of the dangers of belief when combined with power. Symbols, myths, and rituals can be weaponized to justify ideology, mobilize populations, and legitimize extreme actions. Hitler's personal engagement with the occult demonstrates how private fascination can translate into public policy, how psychological frameworks can shape historical events, and how the integration of ideology and superstition can magnify both ambition and cruelty. The fascination with the mystical was for Hitler both a source of personal certainty and a tool of political power, a duality that had consequences far beyond his own life and imagination. In the end, Hitler's personal fascination with the occult was a lens through which he viewed the world, a framework through which he interpreted history, and a justification for the vision he pursued. It shaped the symbols, rituals, and myths that became central to the Third Reich, and it influenced the behavior, loyalty, and identity of millions of followers. By studying this aspect of his life, we understand not only the man himself, but also the mechanisms through which ideology, mysticism, and personal obsession can intersect to produce consequences of catastrophic scale. The story of Hitler and the occult is not merely a historical curiosity, It is a testament to the profound influence of belief, the power of myth, and the terrifying potential of obsession when it becomes intertwined with authority, ambition, and the machinery of the state. The legacy of the occult in Nazi Germany is a topic that continues to captivate historians, psychologists, and curious observers more than 8 decades after the fall of the Third Reich. The fascination with mystical knowledge, ancient symbols, relics, and rituals was not simply an eccentric feature of Adolf Hitler or Heinrich Himmler's personal life, left a profound and enduring imprint on the ideology, culture, and even the perception of Nazi Germany in the modern imagination. The occult's influence extended far beyond the castles, secret rituals, and private libraries of the Nazi elite. It shaped propaganda, informed policy, motivated expeditions, and contributed to the mythic narrative of Aryan destiny that justified some of the most horrific acts in human history. Understanding this legacy requires exploring not only the historical events themselves, but also the enduring psychological, cultural, and symbolic impact of Nazi mysticism on both contemporary and post-war thought. One of the most immediate legacies of the Nazi obsession with the occult is the way it intertwined myth, ideology, and political authority into a single narrative that permeated German society. By merging mystical beliefs with racial ideology and state power, Hitler and Himmler created a system in which followers were motivated not only by nationalism or fear, but also by a sense of participating in a sacred mission. Symbols like the swastika, the SS runes, and the eagle were imbued with spiritual significance, transforming ordinary objects into instruments of belief and loyalty. Mass rallies, parades, and ceremonies were carefully orchestrated to evoke awe, unity, and devotion, reinforcing the idea that the Third Reich was not merely a political regime but a continuation of an ancient and divinely sanctioned order. This blending of myth and authority created a psychological and cultural imprint that extended far beyond individual leaders, shaping collective identity, behavior, and perception. The extensive archaeological and pseudo-archaeological expeditions initiated by the Nazis also constitute a tangible legacy of occult obsession. Missions to Tibet, the Middle East, and Northern Europe were framed as both scientific inquiries and spiritual quests, seeking evidence of Aryan ancestry, mystical knowledge, and relics that could legitimize Nazi claims to superiority. These missions were conducted under the auspices of the SS and were meticulously documented through photographs, reports, and collected artifacts. Even though much of the supposed mystical evidence was either fabricated, misinterpreted, or lost in the aftermath of the war, the expeditions left behind a complex historical record that continues to fascinate researchers. They demonstrated the lengths to which the Nazis were willing to go to connect ideology with history, myth, and mystical authority. The legacy of these missions persists in the ongoing study of Nazi archaeology, lost artifacts, and esoteric research. Wewelsburg Castle, the ceremonial center for Himmler's SS, remains one of the most potent symbols of the Nazi occult legacy. The castle was meticulously designed and imbued with layers of symbolism, from the layout of its towers to the inscriptions on its walls and the positioning of ceremonial rooms. The Hall of the Generals and other ritual spaces were intended to reinforce the elite status of the SS, creating a quasi-religious environment that merged history, myth, and authority. Even after the fall of the Third Reich, the castle has retained a mystique in popular imagination, serving as a reminder of how architecture, space, and ritual can be mobilized to reinforce ideology. Its preservation and study by historians underscore the enduring fascination with how the Nazis integrated occultism into the physical and symbolic fabric of their organization. Another key aspect of the legacy of the occult in Nazi Germany is the mythic interpretation of history that the regime created. By selectively rewriting history to emphasize the supposed glory and superiority of the Aryans, the Nazis constructed a narrative in which conquest, domination, and racial policy were framed as part of a cosmic and historical inevitability. This narrative was disseminated through education, propaganda, and public ceremonies, instilling in generations a sense of destiny and moral justification for the regime's actions. The influence of this approach extended far beyond Germany's borders, shaping post-war fascination with Nazi ideology, secret societies, and mystical research. The use of myth to justify power remains a cautionary example of how historical narrative can be manipulated to serve ideology and perpetuate atrocities. The occult also left an enduring imprint on Nazi propaganda, which was designed to manipulate perception and reinforce the sense of destiny, mystique, and inevitability. Joseph Goebbels, the Minister of Propaganda, understood that symbols, myths, and ritualized imagery could evoke emotional responses far more powerful than logic or argument. Films, posters, and rallies presented Hitler and the SS as quasi-messianic figures, aligned with forces of destiny and history. The use of ceremonial space, lighting, music, and carefully choreographed mass events created an almost religious experience, reinforcing loyalty and suppressing dissent. This approach to propaganda has had a lasting influence on how political movements, both in the 20th century and today, understand the power of spectacle, symbolism, and narrative in shaping public perception. The fascination with mystical relics and sacred artifacts also persists as part of the Nazi occult legacy. Stories about the Spear of Destiny, the Holy Grail, and other legendary objects have entered popular culture, sometimes exaggerated or fictionalized, but always linked to the real historical obsession of Hitler and his inner circle. These stories have inspired countless books, documentaries, films, and conspiracy theories, contributing to a cultural fascination with the mystical aspects of the Third Reich. While many of the claims surrounding these artifacts are sensationalized, they reflect the genuine beliefs of the Nazi elite and highlight how obsession with relics can serve as a mechanism of psychological empowerment and ideological reinforcement. Perhaps the most profound and troubling aspect of this legacy is the way in which the integration of mysticism into ideology facilitated moral disengagement and extreme violence. The Third Reich's occult framework, by framing conquest, subjugation, and genocide as part of a divinely sanctioned or historically inevitable mission, created a psychological environment in which atrocities could be rationalized as necessary and righteous. Ritual, symbolism, and myth provided a cognitive structure that allowed individuals to commit acts of cruelty while maintaining a sense of personal and collective virtue. Understanding this aspect of the occult legacy is crucial for comprehending the mechanisms of obedience, indoctrination, and ideological fanaticism that enabled the Holocaust and other crimes of the Nazi regime. It demonstrates how belief systems, when intertwined with power, can produce consequences of catastrophic scale. The Nazi fascination with the occult also left a legacy in post-war culture and scholarship. After 1945, the revelation of these mystical obsessions sparked intense curiosity, speculation, and academic study. Historians have examined the extent to which Hitler, Himmler, and other leaders used symbols, rituals, and myths to manipulate perception and consolidate power. Psychologists and sociologists have analyzed the role of belief, ritual, and group identity in facilitating obedience and ideological conformity. The public imagination has been captivated by the idea of a mystical Third Reich, leading to numerous books, films, and documentaries that explore the intersection of power, superstition, and ideology. While some of these representations are sensationalized, they underscore the enduring fascination and the deep psychological resonance of the Nazi occult. The legacy of the occult in Nazi Germany is also evident in the way it continues to inform discussions of political and cultural extremism. Scholars draw parallels between the Third Reich's use of myth, ritual, and symbolism and other movements that attempt to legitimize ideology through appeals to destiny, sacred history, or mystical authority. By examining the psychological and sociological impact of Nazi mysticism, researchers gain insight into the mechanisms through which belief, ritual, and symbolism can be mobilized to inspire loyalty, obedience, and radical action. This legacy serves as a cautionary tale, illustrating the ways in which ideology and superstition, when intertwined with authority, can shape behavior and justify extreme acts. Beyond politics, the occult legacy of Nazi Germany has had an impact on popular culture, inspiring fiction, films, video games, and literature. Stories about hidden treasures, secret SS rituals, mystical expeditions, and ancient Aryan relics have become staples of modern storytelling. While these narratives are often fantastical, they draw directly on the real obsessions of the Nazi elite and reflect a continued fascination with the intersection of history, myth, and power. The persistence of these stories underscores the enduring symbolic resonance of the Nazi occult, demonstrating how historical fascination with mystical ideology can be transformed into enduring cultural narratives. The physical remnants of the Nazi obsession with the occult, from Wewelsburg Castle to artifacts collected during expeditions, continue to be studied and preserved by historians and museums. These remnants offer a concrete link to the psychological and ideological dimensions of the Third Reich, illustrating how belief, ritual, and symbolism were integrated into the mechanisms of power. They provide scholars with insight into the construction of ideological authority, the use of myth to justify political action, and the ways in which obsession with the mystical can influence both thought and behavior. By studying these materials, historians can better understand the complex interplay between belief, ideology, and governance in one of history's most extreme regimes. The legacy also manifests in the study of the SS and other elite units, whose combination of military discipline, ritualized hierarchy, and mystical indoctrination was unprecedented. Himmler's blending of ritual, symbolism, and esoteric mythology into the structure of the SS created an organizational culture that was deeply loyal, ideologically committed, and psychologically conditioned to accept extreme measures. The study of these mechanisms has informed broader research on organizational psychology, military cohesion, and the role of ideology in shaping behavior, highlighting the enduring relevance of the Nazi occult legacy to both historical and contemporary analyses. The influence of Nazi mysticism is not limited to scholarly study, it has also shaped popular understanding of the Third Reich. The image of Hitler consulting astrologers, Himmler conducting rituals at Wewelsburg, and Nazi expeditions in search of mystical artifacts has become iconic, forming a central part of how many people imagine the Third Reich. This fascination reflects both the shocking nature of these obsessions and the psychological power they exerted within the regime. While some narratives exaggerate or fictionalize aspects of these activities, they are grounded in documented historical behavior and continue to influence perceptions of Nazi ideology and leadership. In this sense, the occult legacy is as much about cultural memory and imagination as it is about historical fact. The legacy of the occult also illustrates broader truths about human behavior and belief. It demonstrates how mythology, symbols, and ritual can be mobilized to justify ideology, reinforce loyalty, and provide a sense of purpose. The Nazis' integration of occultism into governance shows how deeply personal belief systems, when combined with authority, can influence collective behavior and shape historical events. It serves as a warning of the dangers inherent in the fusion of ideology, mysticism, and political power, highlighting how obsession with destiny, purity, or sacred authority can lead to actions with devastating consequences. Ultimately, the legacy of the occult in Nazi Germany is multifaceted. It encompasses the tangible remnants of expeditions, artifacts, and ceremonial sites, the enduring cultural fascination with mystical narratives, the scholarly insights into ideology, psychology, and social control, and the moral and historical lessons about the dangers of belief when combined with power. The fascination with relics, rituals, and symbols was not merely ornamental, it was a core component of the ideological and operational structure of the Third Reich, shaping the behavior, perception, and worldview of those within its orbit. Understanding this legacy is essential to comprehending the full scope of Nazi ideology, and the extraordinary lengths to which belief and myth were harnessed to achieve political, military, and ideological objectives. Even today, the lessons of the Nazi occult remain relevant. The manipulation of symbols, rituals, and myths to consolidate power is a phenomenon that transcends history, appearing in various forms in political movements, cults, and ideologically driven organizations. The study of Nazi mysticism offers insight into the psychological and sociological mechanisms through which individuals and groups are influenced, motivated, and controlled. It illustrates the enduring power of belief, the seductive appeal of myth, and the potential for ideology and superstition to justify extraordinary actions. In this sense, the legacy of the occult in Nazi Germany is not only a historical curiosity, but also a vital lens through which to understand the interaction of human belief, authority, and action. The fascination with Nazi occultism also continues to inspire reflection on moral responsibility and ethical boundaries. By examining how the regime's mystical and ideological obsessions facilitated atrocities, scholars and educators highlight the importance of critical thinking, ethical reasoning, and historical awareness. The integration of myth and superstition into state power demonstrates how cognitive frameworks can be manipulated to suppress empathy, normalize cruelty, and create a sense of inevitability around morally abhorrent actions. The occult legacy of the Third Reich, therefore, is not merely a tale of historical eccentricity. It is a profound lesson in the potential consequences of belief unmoored from morality and humanity. In the broader context of modern culture, the legacy of Nazi mysticism has also shaped literature, film, and media portrayals of history and conspiracy. From historical thrillers and adventure novels to documentaries and video games, the imagery of the mystical Third Reich resonates with audiences around the world. While these portrayals often dramatize or fictionalize the historical record, they reflect the enduring power of symbols, myths, and rituals in capturing the imagination. They also serve as a reminder that the allure of hidden knowledge, sacred relics, and mystical authority is a recurring human theme, one that the Nazis exploited with devastating effect and one that continues to fascinate observers today. Finally, the legacy of the occult in Nazi Germany underscores the complex interplay between personal obsession and collective action. Hitler's fascination with mysticism, Himmler's ceremonial vision for the SS, and the broader integration of myth and ritual into the state demonstrate how the private preoccupations of leaders can have enormous consequences when combined with institutional power. The rituals, symbols, and expeditions were not isolated curiosities. They were mechanisms that shaped ideology, reinforced loyalty, and contributed directly to the policies and actions of the Nazi state. By examining this legacy, we gain a deeper understanding of how belief, obsession, and myth can intersect with history, power, and morality, leaving a mark that endures long after the fall of a regime. In conclusion, the legacy of the occult in Nazi Germany is vast, multifaceted, and deeply influential. It encompasses historical artifacts, architectural and ceremonial spaces, propaganda, cultural memory, scholarly analysis, and moral reflection. The fascination with myth, ritual, and relics shaped the Third Reich from its leadership to its policies, embedding belief in the mystical into the very fabric of power. This legacy continues to captivate scholars and the public alike, offering insight into the ways ideology, superstition, and human obsession can shape history, influence behavior, and leave enduring lessons for future generations. The story of the Nazi occult is a cautionary tale, a cultural fascination, and a historical reality, a reminder that the allure of myth and mysticism can, in the hands of power, have consequences that are both extraordinary and devastating.